Testing, testing. Okay, well, I'm going to begin. My name is Ari Melenciano. Excited to join you all in Beats by Girls and talk about some work that I do in doing experiments with Sonic Electromedia. And so what I mean by that is using creative technology and sound to create, whether it's new forms of performance or composition or hearing music. So I'll kind of dive into some of the work that I've done and we can go from there. So let's see. All right, so experiments with Electro, experiments with Sonic Electromedia. To give context as to who I am an artist who has always appreciated technology and design and has dived into research through my creative practice in art and design, went into education and teaching about design and technology, and generally I'm always a student. One of my favorite things about being an educator and teaching all of these sorts of mediums and technologies is that I get to learn from the students around me and the people around me. So I started off as an artist, someone who loved to just create with a bunch of different mediums. Oftentimes it was visual media and illustrations and sketches and drawing, whether it's creating posters or flyers or all sorts of different ways to represent information through visual media and advertising and marketing, and really just enjoying the ways that we could use color and typography and graphic design to create these sort of stimulating visuals for people to gain information from, and also for artistic expression. And so in being someone that loved the art side of things and creating with visuals, and also someone that appreciated sound a lot, I wanted, as I entered into creative technology and learned how to do things like creative computation, I wanted to create opportunities to blend these worlds of technology and visuals, but also with sound. And so I would start creating and learning how to do things like program and code. One of my first projects were to create sound interactive visuals, where I would create these illustrations that then responded to sound. So these were different screen captures of those graphics that I would create that were sound interactive, and then this is them in motion. So as the sound is amplified, or as you hear different things, you then see it translate into the visual media, changing the way that it's composed and the way that it's operating. So the sounds coming into the computer would then change the shape of the circles or the colors, all sorts of things. And so in being a DJ, I was really excited about creating these sort of sound interactive visuals, because then I could bring them into the parties that I was DJing at, so that the projection and the screens could be dancing at the same rhythm as the people that were inside of the room. So it was creating a very immersive, fun, and hyper-sensorial kind of arrangement for people that were going to a party but amping it up with some technology. And so then I started to get away from creating mostly with visuals on a screen that were sound interactive, but I wanted to do some hardware. So usually I was doing software development with sound interactive work, but I wanted to get into hardware and start building things that people could tangibly touch, they could actually touch, that were tangible and tactile, but also continuing this element of sound, of new ways to experience sound or compose sound. So I started to create these sort of sound sculptures, where I would think about sculpture in the way that it's traditionally operating of you create something that's aesthetically pleasing possibly, but it's very much a visual kind of language. And as someone that just appreciated the built environment and built arrangements and the ways that they kind of transferred the way that you assume an environment to be, I wanted to continue along that vein and create these miniature sculptures where I would then infuse technology into them. So I would bring in these different sensors into these different sculptures, and these sensors would then turn this sculpture, which would have generally been something aesthetically to look at, more of an aesthetic tool, and made it something that's actually a tool and functional beyond its aesthetics. So in this video, there's no sound in the video, but as I touch the different sensors, or as I expose light to the different sensors, whether it's a phototransistor, which is a light cell that changes the data, incoming data based on how much light is coming in, or the soft ribbon potentiometer, or circular potentiometer, which is where my hand is in the top left, and that changing. And all these different sensors were controlling the output of sound. So the frequency would change and the amplitude, all based on the ways that I was interacting with it. So it was really me thinking about how can I create instruments that are beyond the norm and allow for new ways for people to engage with them and make some sound. And so this was also during a time when I was doing a course called New Interfaces for Musical Expression. So we were tasked with creating our own performance, and so we would have to create our own instrument from scratch, and then we would then live compose with that instrument in front, as if we were in a concert. It was a concert, and then we could also create the environment behind us, and all of those things were really exciting for me because I love the possibility to or the opportunity to be able to create my own instrument, compose with it, create all the video art behind me, my costume, and all of that. And so when I was thinking of, okay, well, what kind of performance do I want to have? What kind of instrument do I want to make? At the time, I was thinking a lot about rock stars and Jimi Hendrix and just the beauty of a guitar in someone's hand, and really kind of wanted to elevate that guitar and make it something that used technology and fused technology more. So I created my own guitar with a bunch of different sensors, and so as you touch these different arcade buttons or potentiometers, they would then translate into sound. So it was a sort of electric guitar, but far from the way that we traditionally use or see or observe electric guitars to look like. And then I also created a beat machine. So this was again another series of arcade buttons being used as an instrument, and fabricated the whole thing and programmed it so that it was basically a MIDI controller. So as I touched the different buttons, the information would pass through Arduino's platform and then go into Max MSP, which would then go into Arduino or Ableton. So all of these different modes of communication just to be able to produce some sort of sound in a way that I could, have fun with it. And so this was the end result of the drum machine. I had again some more soft ribbon potentiometers, regular linear potentiometers, and some arcade buttons. So all of these were tools for creating with sound and composing with sound in a new form. And then this was the performance. So it was fun creating my own costume, creating the whole set design, the music, and the instrument, and creating an entire environment that was very multisensorial and hypersensorial, of a bunch of different stimulating mediums being projected into the space that people were in. This is a series of projects that I started playing around with sound, and for me it was fun to be able to create those machines and make something that was both artistic in its form but functional and utilitarian. But I also wanted to get away from things that are fancier and harder to access and think more about how art can be made out of anything, and how technology and how powerful it is can also be used with mere scraps maybe, or less fancy material to also still create some really fun and interactive pieces. So I would just use these pieces of felt that I would arrange in an artistic form, and then put some copper tape over it so that as you touch the copper tape, you would then be able to play different sounds. And for me, it was really thinking about, again, continuing this functional art thing of creating something that could be an art piece within itself, but then by attaching the technology to it, it also becomes something that's functional. So this is one version, and here is another one. So the way that these worked were, again, the copper tape being connected to the alligator clips, so that the circuit, when it's being closed by me touching the copper tape, could then signal to my microcontroller that circuit is closed, and so then that microcontroller would then trigger a sound associated with that circuit. So in continuing this idea of ways to create these sound sculptures, I was thinking a lot about culture, and what the future of Black culture specifically might be, and thinking a lot about the cultural artifacts, Black culture artifacts like do-rags and colored braids and bamboo earrings and afro picks, and the ways that all of these different cultural artifacts, for me, I identify them as something that's really beautiful and that has such strong tradition behind them, but oftentimes they are stigmatized in the States and generally anywhere, because especially they're stigmatized most heavily when they're on a person that is Black, but when they're put on to someone that's not Black, it's kind of this cool, it becomes this hip and cool thing when it's removed from its cultural identity, its original cultural identity. So I wanted to go into that more and study that, and create these sort of pieces that really elevate these cultural artifacts in the ways that I see them and puts them in a new light, and also considers the future of them. With technology being the sort of symbol of the future, I wanted to infuse technology into these cultural artifacts and create my own sound sculptures. So the series was called Electro, Negro, Synesthesia, and that it was an infusion of technology with Black culture to create a synesthetic or a synesthesia sort of experience. So it's audio and visual. And so I would create these things like a sculpture of someone with a do-rag on, and as you touch the do-rag in those different areas with the copper tape, it would play different sounds, creating sound sculptures with bamboo earrings and hair rollers. And so as you touch these different machines, they would produce their own sounds as well. As you change the afro pick on the right and use different afro picks, they all had their sort of own DNA, and when you place the different afro picks on top of the bed, that DNA would then translate into visuals that would change on the screen. And then if you touch the hair, the braids, that was also an instrument within itself of, as you touch the different braids, they would also have sounds within them. And that one was a pretty interesting project for me, because generally you're not allowed to, it's generally disrespectful to touch a Black person's hair, but for me, I wanted to create a space where we're thinking about the magnificence and beauty and power of Blackness, and being able to interact with it's an entrance into something that's even more spectacular, that's hidden. So it's kind of creating this experience of a mirror interaction with the Black culture artifact can then produce something. And so here are some other sculptures created where I'm using machines like a laser cutter, which cuts up all these acrylic materials that I've put together and created different shapes and decorations with. And so this is a performance with So continuing those by that project, by then exploring ways of doing, for me it was a lot of experimental pedagogy. So thinking of ways that I could create these multisensorial kind of experiences where we have visuals, it's audio and visual, but then also using that audio and visual, or at least the visual, to give information and cultural context, while also using sounds and excerpts to do the similar thing. So in this experience, I was invited to the art school in California to create this environment, or to present this environment that I already developed, where I'm using sound excerpts from different political leaders and playing them and infusing them into different African drum patterned music, whether it's hip hop or Afro beats. And then also have on the walls, projected on the walls, you see Angela Davis behind me, which I VJ different cultural figures. And then also on the other wall have lyrics from different songs, Black political songs, and sound interactive visuals that also change what's being seen. And in being a DJ, I'm bridging these worlds of sound, design, and sort of experimental composition with DJing and mixing in music. So I was thinking a lot also about the kind of how media often is designing what blackness is, and through media you kind of have these different understandings of what people are like and the way that they're stereotyped. So I wanted to be the person that's on the other side of that, of not being on the receiving end of whatever media gives me, but instead is creating things through media for other people to have a different perception of culture in general. And so I would create these different 3D animated characters and distort them and change them, and similar to the way that I feel like media, kind of an analogy of the way that media does to the community, the black community. And then I would animate them with different dances, cultural dances, and design their costumes. And then I would place them in different environments that I've created. And then I would create video art from all of that. So creating a way for these characters to enter the space and distort them and play around with their visuals and create a collection of media that is cultural, political, and visual. And then I would use that in my performances, live performances. Then I would have a bunch of different instruments, sound machines that whether I've created or have bought. And if I've bought, I'm using sounds that I've created or distorted and manipulating all of them to then create this audio-visual experience that considers culture and politics in a sort of experimental pedagogical way. And so I continue to expand on this work of DJing, but also moving into the web and not being tied to, especially as we've entered quarantine, not being tied to performing and presenting in person, but also creating online environments for people to enter and then DJ inside of. And so just as that last video was recorded by Culture Hub through a performance that I did at Culture Hub, this was me DJing inside of a web VR environment that I designed, and bringing myself as a DJ inside of the space so that other people could enter and they would hear my music, but they could also move around this web VR environment. So perfect for quarantine and being able to DJ remotely. So this was a video of the space. And so beyond web VR, also exploring with AR. And so AR is a way for you to use these different target images. So if you can see here, all of these different images I've created, there are different illustrations, and they're also target markers. So as I reveal, I'm using my phone right now you're seeing footage coming out of my phone's camera. And so as my phone's camera identifies these different target markers, it'll then recognize those and then play a sound and show a visual that I've assigned that target marker to have. So as we see here, I can use these different illustrations to control what sound's being heard. So all of those were sounds that I created and produced and then assigned them to different visuals so that you could hear them. So a new way of listening to music. And so also more recently, maybe in the past year, I've gotten really into modular synthesizers and how modular synthesizers can be this, for one, it's a really fun and tangible sort of experience in composing music, getting away from the computer screen or even drum machines, but really getting into the sound waves and controlling very precisely how each sound is formed and experienced, and effects that you apply to it. It's kind of like, for me, the modular synthesizer set that I've created is, for me, it feels very much like a sort of even more advanced Ableton way of distorting music and bringing in these different effects by turning of knobs and patching cables in different areas. So I've also been thinking a lot about how modular synthesizers are named Euroracks, as if named after Europe, with Euroracks, but how with different modules you can do things like polyrhythmic sort of compositions, which is very much a foundation of African drum pattern music, of polyrhythmic. And so I wanted to find ways or explore with ways to bring in these sort of African tradition kind of sounds into something that's named after Europe and have that observe that relationship. So a lot of my work since then has been exploring that. And one project that I've been speculating is using computer vision through Max to then go into Ableton and translate the sound. And I'll show an example of that. Before I get to that, also exploring how, like we've seen earlier iterations of my work in creating 3D environments, but now I've gotten more into creating 3D environments myself, like with the virtual DJ thing that was through Mozilla Hubs. That's me bringing in these different elements onto a platform that already has WebVR. But lately I've been getting a lot more into designing from scratch my own WebVR environments, and being very inspired by sound systems from Jamaican political sonic movements, them really taking advantage of how technology can allow them to embrace their own agency and create opportunity for them to celebrate with music, as opposed to letting centralized networks, media networks, control what sounds are being heard. So this would be an example of using computer vision to then control my modular synthesizer. So as you can see here, as you can see in this video, as I move the Lego around, I've mapped it so that my computer understands the color of the Lego, and as it's moved in different areas, it's then going to change the LFO, low frequency oscillator, which will control the sound and change it differently. And so continuing along this, using modular synthesizers to then create these sort of different sort of experiences, I started getting into ways that modular synthesizers could also be used as a data visualization tool. And so I was commissioned by the Onassis Foundation to create a project that I had been thinking about for a while, about how through COVID and the pandemic and us working more remotely and people operating more remotely, how drastically that's changed the environment in healthier ways and less pollution circulating and less pollution being produced, and wanted to create a data visualization, a sonic and audio visual data visualization, where I would create algorithms that translated climate data into voltage controlled settings for my modular synthesizer, so that each city's climate data could then have its own soundscape. And so I put all of this together into a website, and so I'll show it here. And so when you enter this website, you're greeted with a video of the world, which is a symbol of this whole project, Electricology of Sound Travel, of how you can access different cities through their sound. And so you can enter this environment by clicking on one of the different cities. So I'll go to Accra, Ghana. And now when I'm here, and it's saying scroll to find the portal. So this is all a WebVR environment where I've mapped visuals from Accra, Ghana onto here, and you can explore and move around and see that. But then you can, and there's also data here of things about Accra, Ghana, like their climate data, the algorithm that I developed for Accra, videos going to Accra, Ghana, and some more the cityscape and how it all looks, and topography. And then as you go inside the portal, there's then a WebVR, there's a modular synthesizer soundscape, converting that climate data into sound. So I could go to Tokyo, and you can just go to, there are 5 different main cities that I've created these experiences for, and you can look at the data on all of them and the algorithms, and as you move into the portal, you'll then hear the modular synthesized soundscape. Here's another one. So 5 cities total, and then going here you'll learn more about the project. And so that was a really fun way of exploring how data could be translated into sound and visuals, and creating an algorithm that converts data into something that's usable for the modular synthesizer, and then creating a soundscape based off of that data. Another project was with the modular synthesizer, and again, as I mentioned earlier, of how modular synthesizers are very capable of doing polyrhythmic sort of sounds. And I've been very interested in the ways that sounds make people or inspire people to move their body in certain ways. And so in an upcoming residency that I'll be doing, I've been exploring ways that I could combine dance and the movement of the body and see its patterns and relationships to sound, and what patterns exist, if there are any patterns, and observing the ways that people move their bodies in relation to, maybe it's the frequency or the repetition of different drum patterns or whatever it is, and creating a way to observe those relationships. So here I have a sound, a modular synthesized produced beat that I've made, and then I also created something using machine learning where it's using the computer vision to identify the person that's in front of the computer and see the vertices of their different joints and body limbs. So you see a person here, which is me just dancing in front of my computer and observing the ways that the music inspires me to move, and then creating an application for other people to then try, and then using all of that information in sort of a database to then observe the patterns that people do generally in relation to music. So as I play this video, you'll see me dancing, and then you'll hear the music from the modular synthesizer. So I'll go on to the next project, which is metamorphosis.fm, and this has been another project that I've created for Afrotectopia, which is an organization and institution that I developed, and that where I wanted to explore how sound, thinking about this current social uprising, and wanted to create an opportunity for Black people to heal through sound amidst all of these protests, to go into an environment that's accessible through the web, so it's free for anyone, and they can enter. And as they enter this space, I've infused it with different frequencies from different energy centers or chakras, and also infused it with African drum patterns and African drum instrumentation, whether it's talking drums or djembes, and these being tools for revolutions. If you look up things like the Haitian Revolution or just revolutions around the diaspora, talking drums and djembes and other African drums and patterns have been tools to uplift and gather and communicate people of the African diaspora. So creating an online environment that allows people to heal through cultural specific methods. So in studying different chakras and the relationships between chakras and energy centers and the frequencies in which they are directly correlated to, I then composed music that tied to each of those different chakras, and then created sound, drum pattern music, and used different instrumentation that would be culturally specific to people of the African diaspora. And then put it on the web, so created this online environment called Metamorphosis, which is an audio healing virtual environment that uses sound frequencies and light waves directly tied to energy centers, as well as African drum patterns and instrumentation of diasporic revolutions to nurture people of the diaspora. And so once you enter that space, you'll see an environment similar to this, which I designed, 3D rendered and designed it in a different application, then brought it into the web. So each of these little spaces are specifically for each chakra, and then as you go towards the spheres, you're then greeted with the sound. So I'll show you what that looks like. So inside of metamorphosis.fm, you should see it, and I'll expand it. And so as you enter inside of here, it takes a little bit to load, so just be a little patient. And once you see the environment, then you can then proceed. You can also move forward now, but it's best to wait for it to load. I'm actually just going to refresh it. So as I move through, and as you get closer to the spheres, you will hear sound for each specific energy center. So this one is for root, and it's about being grounded and secure. So as you get closer to the sphere, you'll hear it. And then as you move away, you'll not hear it, and you'll hear the next energy center, which is sacral. And creativity and harmony. So I'm just using my arrow keys to navigate through this space. So solar plexus. as you move away from the spheres, you can't hear anything, and eventually it'll be expanded so that different solfeggio frequencies outside of here can also exist, so that there are other ways of sound healing. But you can generally just navigate through the space and jump into different frequencies as you feel like you need those. Really generally just meant to be a space of imagination, to create opportunities for people to just heal in a space that excites them and inspires their creativity and nurtures, different levels of humanity. And so that's about it for me. Now I can go into answering any questions, and I believe Bertha and Cassie, you all will send me questions. So in a question that I have so far, one being exactly how do the Lego pieces change the LFO of the synth? That is with computer vision. In Max MSP, there's a tool to use a color identifier and say that anytime you see this yellow color in whatever position that it's in, use that data to then, I use that data to then control the LFO. So I forgot what I did exactly to output the LFO information. I think I just have a sound card, and I output one of those lines into my modular synthesizer, and I say for this line, change the LFO and control that LFO, and then control the LFO by using the computer vision, which is identifying the Lego. Software that I use to create visuals for my virtual DJ project. Softwares for that. For the virtual one that I showed in the beginning, that I did as a DJ for Culture Hub's, one of Culture Hub's events, that was with Mozilla Hubs. So Mozilla, like I think they do Firefox, I can't remember, but Mozilla, Mozilla Hubs, Hubs, and you can create these web VR environments. I've moved outside of Mozilla Hubs just because for me it can take a lot of energy on the computer, and I just design my own environments with Cinema 4D, which is a 3D environment, a 3D renderer, and then I export my files into WebVR using A-Frame. Can you submit music to this project? I don't know which project you're referring to, but none of these right now are open. They're more of just creating and putting them onto the web. None of them are submission oriented yet. Were these sounds you created per city, or did you collect sounds from the city? The sounds that were created in relation to the project for electrology of sound travel, the sounds that were created all came from the modular synthesizer. So they were using climate data from each city. So each city, whether it's Accra or Sao Paulo, I would use the climate data in the midst of quarantine and then convert that climate data through the same algorithm for each city into voltage controlled settings for my modular synthesizer. So it wasn't using any sounds from specifically the cities. It was more of using the climate data to then create my own sounds. Program did I use to track movement and connect it to the synthesizer? That was with Max MSP, and so Max MSP and Ableton, they have a great relationship, and you can use different Max patches, Max for Live patches, which will be able to use computer vision to then control something inside of your Ableton software. And thank you. I'm glad it inspired the Latin community. I'm also Latina. The African diaspora is in the Latin community as well, or the Latin community is in the African diaspora, so they're all very tied. And someone should feature this in Yoga Journal. That would be cool. Any other questions? And so it's really just about playing around with these different softwares. As you get into them, you find more and more possibilities, and it's really great to just explore and see what's possible. A lot of my work, I didn't even include things that I do with like drum machines or like the different teenage engineering machines, but really with sound and technology and combining these worlds, it's endless with the possibilities that you can do. What kind of courses and self-learning can someone take on to create similar artwork from me that I do? I learned a lot from YouTube. Really, that's where I got pretty much all my information from. Whenever I'm doing things like with Cinema 4D or with Ableton or with any of the machines that I'm doing, a lot of it is coming from just going on YouTube and searching the different products that I want to use. And I could even show my YouTube channel because I have some things there that I didn't show inside of if I go to my channel. So on my YouTube channel, for one, I do tutorials on creative coding. So that might be helpful for anyone that's interested in getting in and doesn't know where to begin. Here I have starting from colors and shapes. So we'll learn a bit about how to use P5 to create some fun applications, but also how to use P5 to do sound interactive sort of things. Like here, so those visuals that I showed you earlier, how to do that, or how to create an audio-visual keyboard. Have also generally have a playlist for different music experiences. Previously, or a year ago, I would do Monday music experiments. So every Monday, I would bring a bunch of my controllers or sound machines together and then compose some really fun, weird sounds together and make some compositions and see what happens. So these were some other ones, just using a bunch of different machines. And this also is a demo. Say you're interested in a machine and you want to hear how it sounds. This would be a good place to go and see what's possible. Have also put up modular synthesized sets, so those can be very experimental. Just because that's the nature of modular synthesizers, they can be have a lot of different outputs. And yeah, so I would say if you're looking to learn about creative technology, I have some tutorials here, but they're also really cool tutorials by other people that have done that. And if you're looking to learn about different machines, I have some machines here, but a lot of the other work using different softwares to make some fun sound interactive kind of experiences, that would be best. So just looking up the software in YouTube and figuring out how exactly to do it. What's a good place for someone who's interested in these fields to begin, especially youth? I would say, again, also the YouTube channel. I have a few tutorials, but other places, Ableton has a really great website where they teach you a bit about sound design. I think Lander does too, LANDR. They have good tutorials, but generally I would just say going on YouTube, and if you say I want to learn how to do computer vision applications with Max MSP, then just searching in YouTube computer vision Max MSP, and then people will have different tutorials. Sometimes it's hard to just figure out where to begin. It can be overwhelming, so it's really just good just to dive in, play around with a few things, and see if that works for you. But if that also gets overwhelming, it would be good to watch some tutorials that people have created where you can start from the beginning of maybe it's Max or Ableton. And as you find kind of what you're interested in, as you get the foundation kind of skills, then you can dive deeper into that, and you know better what questions to ask. So you know that with Ableton, you might want to learn how to do Max for Live with Ableton. YouTube searching Max for Live Ableton tutorial, then you'll find different ways to bring all those in. Another question being, any other ways we can combine music and activism during this uprising moment? I was thinking of covering old revolutionary songs, but wanted to know other ideas. Yeah, I mean, it's really what's the purpose of you creating those things, thinking about that and working backwards. I think this can be a very inspiring time to create work that empowers people or is a representation of the time. But I think for me, whenever I have students that, whenever I'm teaching, I really generally don't give them ideas on how to create their own projects, because it should really come from them. Or that was a question that someone asked me of any other ways we can combine music and activism during this uprising moment. because they want to know other ideas. I think my general practice is not to give students ideas. It's more of what's your goal and your objective, and then working backwards from there. So if your goal or objective is to maybe show the relationship or contradiction between the 1960s and 2020 and how maybe some things are the same and some things are different, then you could use sound to show that relationship or how much things are similar or different. But I would say the most important question for the artist to ask themselves is, who's their audience? What's the purpose of what they're creating? Why do they want to create it? And what do they want someone to feel after they've experienced it? Or what do they want someone to leave knowing after they've created it? And then create something from there. Any other questions? Another question is, I would like to send the meditation chakra project to African American yoga teachers in my community. Is there a press release for it that non-tech people can understand? That's a great question. I'm glad. It would be great for you to share it with them. The press release is being worked on. Hopefully that'll be out by next week. But a general good way to share it would be, or a good place to look on what to share about it would be going to afrotectopia.org. So Afro, AFROTECTOPIA.org, and it'll be uploaded there for you to be able to share with other people to use it. And there will also be a feedback form on how people were able to experience it and what their general experience was, because metamorphosis is generally a pretty it's a prototype for future projects of Afrotectopia. So it's really seeing how do people experience being in web VR, meditating, being in web VR, and healing and engaging online and gathering online in web VR. So I will look out for any other questions. Okay, so I think this might be a good time to wrap up, and I would say that in going forward, you can go back to my YouTube channel. You can see any of the experiments that I'm doing, but really all of this work, though it may seem pretty advanced when I'm presenting it, it all takes a lot of work and experimentation, and messing around with different technologies and seeing what works and what doesn't work. But a lot of it is all, like a lot of the different titles, the title for this presentation alone is experiments, and that's really how you learn best, of just combining different technologies, seeing what works, what doesn't work, going with your interests, diving deep into those interests. I also have another application or website that I can show you, or if you go on my Medium page, medium.com/Ari Melenciano, I have a art and technology kind of guide, a 101 on different creative technology tools that you can use that would allow you to realize a lot of the things that I showed you. So processing being one of them. Processing is basically was before P5.js. It existed before P5.js, but P5.js stems from processing. So it's great to kind of learn processing and see how that was designed. But it's P5.js is even easier to kind of get used to and learn, especially because it's web accessible. You can go, if you click onto P5.js, you'll have access to the editor, online editor, so you can play around with that. You could play around with Scratch, which is generally made for children, primary school students, but it's also a really good tool for anyone of all ages. Glitch is a really great tool to learn how other people have created these sort of sound-based, interactive sort of tools. So you can go there. There's Open Frameworks and Cinder. So all of these things, they can be very difficult to learn in the beginning if you're just getting into this world. But just YouTube searching tutorial on Cinder or tutorial on Open Frameworks, and you'll generally begin to get the hang of it. It definitely takes persistency to keep trying and figuring out how it works. But the more you do it, the more you get used to it. In Arduino, this was one of the tools that I used in my one of the projects I showed you of creating the beat machine and the guitar. Raspberry Pi is basically a more powerful Arduino. And then there are also Little Bits, which the company doesn't exist anymore as far as I know, but you could still find these online and create some small version synthesizers. Bare Conductive is a tool that I use also in my Negro Synesthesia project, so I just brought in a microcontroller that makes it really easy to just upload sounds and then interact with them. Leap Motion, Unity, Vuforia, these are all more game engine sort of things. And then we come into here, which is things that you all would probably be interested in, which is Maximus P, which is a really powerful tool in doing maybe it's audio visual kind of work. You can connect your different hardware devices. There's Pure Data, and so this is basically Maximus P, but it's free. Maximus P isn't free, but Pure Data is. It's the free version of Maximus P. They were created by the same person. With this one, it's not as easy to connect Pure Data to Ableton, but if you have Ableton, you may already have access to Maximus P. And then with 3D rendering, there's Blender and Maya and Tinkercad and Rhino. I use Cinema 4D, which I didn't include in here, but it's a lot like Blender and Maya. And then with animation, this is the tool I use to create those 3D characters that I showed you all earlier. So Adobe Fuse allows you to create them, and then Mixamo allows you to animate them. And then also there's machine learning tools like Wikinator and MO5. Machine learning can be a lot of fun with sound and Runway. And then these are other resources. So you can go to these links and you can try them out and see what works for you as far as learning different ways or seeing examples of what people have done with creative technology. And then it's always good to just look up different institutions that have been doing creative tech sort of work. So looking at the classes that exist at NYU ITP, which is a program I came out of, or University's Denver Clinic for Social Open Source Arts, or MIT Media Lab, or School of Poetic, all of these different institutions, they have, whether it's artists that they're supporting that are doing really interesting work, or they're teaching different technologies that you can enjoy. So I will wrap it up there. Thank you all for joining and learning, and feel free to send me any questions on any of these social networks, and I'm happy to answer them. So